quickly, just a little background. The lifetime prevalence rate of major depressive disorder is 6.7% in the United States. However, we know that minorities are more often diagnosed than their white peers. We also know that minorities are less likely to be treated and less likely to stay in treatment. So that's a problem, obviously. However, we do know that psychotherapeutic interventions are effective for many populations, including Blacks and Latinx populations. But we don't know that if they're effective with Asians. So there's about 17 million Asian individuals living in the United States. The references that I found say that they are the fastest growing racial ethnic group, but regardless if it's Latinx or Asian populations, two big growing populations, right, that we don't know a lot about. But whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. But the big thing is we don't really know much about them, and it's a growing population that we need to know more about so that we can treat them. I'm choosing to focus on East Asians, mostly because East Asians are Koreans, Chinese, and Japanese individuals, mostly because all of the literature is on East Asians. There's even less on Southeast Asians, on Middle Eastern populations, and so on. But East Asian Americans are very under-researched. There's one RCT that I know of that is on East Asians, and for many, many empirical studies and RCTs, Asians aren't even involved or included. When I was studying this meta-analysis, I emailed several researchers who had done an RCT that I saw that included Asians. It was like 2 or 3 in like a sample of 400. So I'd asked them, like, well, can I get that data, desegregate it so that I can compile all of these Asians together? And almost all of the researchers said, that's not worth doing it for 3 people. Great, but now we know nothing about East Asians. So the studies that do exist are mostly based in East Asia. So I think that if we can pretty much ask is therapy effective for East Asians, then we can kind of start looking at how can we apply those therapeutic treatments for East Asian Americans. So this is just a meta-analysis on depression change from baseline to follow-up for psychotherapeutic interventions in East Asian clients. So in terms of the methods, my inclusion criteria are pretty basic. The study must have been an RCT for psychotherapy for treatment of depression in adults. Depression needed to have been measured at baseline and at a post-intervention at some point. And then the article must be in English. In terms of exclusion criteria, also pretty basic. I excluded studies on children or adolescents because that's more variability. Another moderator that I just didn't want to include. If the study was on maintenance for depressive symptoms, I also didn't include them because I wanted to see a more drastic change from baseline to follow-up. And then the studies weren't included if participants did not meet the diagnostic criteria for depression. And I also didn't include studies if there wasn't enough data to equate effect sizes. So in terms of the literature search, I really took advantage of Coper's search. So basically he did a big systematic review of every study on psychotherapeutic interventions on depression from 1966 to 2012. So I took his database and then I redid his search using his search terms. So doing that compiled his database, my search, which ended up being 2,246, breaking it down to 29 studies eventually when I excluded all those others. So in terms of coding is pretty basic. I coded for article characteristics, some participant characteristics, design and intervention characteristics, and then the information needed to equate effect sizes. So in terms of calculating effect size, I looked at standardized mean difference. So I used Becker's D, which is a temporal comparison pre to post. I corrected for small sample sizes because there was a lot of that, using Hedges G. And then I set all of the effect sizes to be positive to denote a reduction in depressive scores. The software I used was the Metaphor package in R. And then in results, study characteristics, 29 studies. This aggregate sample is 3,666 participants. The mean, 63% of the sample is female. Mean age was 46 years old. Locations are pretty spread out: Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan. The sample is also ranged in depressive levels, so there was 7 severe, 14 moderate, and 8 mild. And then depression inventories are also pretty spread out, although the majority did use some variation on the Beck depression inventory. The interventions are also spread out. A lot of them were variations on CBT, but there's also like laughter therapy, art therapy, reminiscence therapy, a lot of different stuff. So it's pretty cool. The mean length of intervention was 9 weeks, and the mean length, the mean follow-up after the intervention finished was 9 weeks as well. So in terms of depression effect size, using a mixed effects model, the pre-post effect size change was 0.23, so that's a little less than a standard quarter standard deviation from baseline to follow-up. So if you're going to pay attention to anything, this is probably the coolest thing about this entire presentation, is this funnel forest plot. So the overall effect size is 0.24, cool, and then each author, each study has its own line with their effect size. The larger squares represent larger sample sizes, so they have more power. So what's really happening here is the smaller samples like Zoo had a sample of 12, so they have obviously much larger standard errors and larger confidence interval. So they're trying to pull the effect size over, while the more powered samples like Imamura, pulling it back. So I weighted the effect sizes to give more power weight to the larger samples. So there also is some publication bias that's happening. So we probably all have this situation, the phylogel problem. We've done a study, we really hope for a significant result, we don't get a significant result. So what do we do with that? We throw it in the phylogel and never think about it again. We don't publish it. So what's happening here is basically, looking at this funnel plot, is we get all the published studies on this side, and none of the basically non-significant studies on this side. And so there's some publication bias that's occurring. So I corrected for that using the trim and fill method, and doing the trim and fill method, I still found roughly the same effect size. So looking at this funnel plot, the open circles are just representing the fake publications that would exist if they were published. So going back, basically there's a lot of heterogeneity in the studies. So basically what's happening is there's something else that's accounting for the variation in effect sizes, and that would be type of treatment as a moderator. So type of treatment moderates the depression scores at baseline to follow-up. So basically what I'm finding is some interventions are more effective for East Asian clients. In particular, CBT and culture-sensitive treatments seem to be most effective. There's some other ones that also obviously have significant results, but the CBT interventions and the culture-sensitive treatments have the larger sample sizes, so we can probably put more weight and confidence in them compared to, I think reminiscence therapy was a much, much smaller sample. So what did I find? Basically, depression was reduced by about a quarter standard deviation from baseline to follow-up. CBT and culture-sensitive treatments, yes, seem to be probably the best treatments to use with East Asian individuals. And doing this, I've just basically found very few studies on Asian clients, and a lot of the studies had very small sample sizes, which is a huge limitation on what we can understand about East Asians. So in terms of limitations, I've already said this. Not a lot of studies. A lot of them had small sample sizes, which limits the analyses that we can do. I didn't have any unpublished research. However, even correcting for that, there's still effect size that seems to exist. The studies are only in English, so I'm also probably missing a study in Korean, a study in Mandarin, whatever, that has published, but I wasn't able to obtain them. In terms of future directions, I would like to do a larger search of the literature, add in additional languages, not just RCTs as well. Look to compare treatments and controls. There were some issues with me doing that for this study, but hopefully I can do that in the future. But what I really am excited about is looking at and testing how CBT and culture-sensitive treatments might be effective for East Asian American clients rather than just East Asians. So I'd like to look at further treatment and how that works for them, and also engagement and retention for these clients. Thank you.
Yeah, I really liked looking at